Good morning, or good afternoon, sorry. Wrong time.
It's what we say when we greet each other at a formal session.
I think everybody's reading the ARPA stuff, so we're all distracted.
Yeah, I was trying to facilitate roundtable while scanning.
Oh, that's right. It's at 1 o'clock, right? On Tuesdays.
And it turns out that if you're trying to listen to people and reading at the same time, you don't do either one of them very well, or
Right.
I don't do them both very well.
Yeah, I hear you. And the weather has been rainy, sunny, and so it's hot, and then it's cold in my office, and it's just like, oh my goodness.
Hi, everybody. Sorry about that. I've been having issues. What's
I'm sorry
new,
to
right?
hear that, Chair.
Is
We were
everybody
just talking about our issues, so.
everybody was just saying, yeah, sure, okay. What's new? You always have issues. Sorry. Carolina called me in a panic. Sorry, guys. Apologize for that. Well, at this time, if everybody's here, including me, looks like everybody's here. Okay. We'll call to order the Yamhill County Board of Commissioners informal session for November 9th, 2021, 2 o'clock. And I want to thank Carolina for getting us on the air. And we'll have the flag salute. So Commissioner Kula, could you lead us in the pledge?
Certainly, Chair. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, thank you for that. Our calendar session, anything to add to our joint calendar?
I don't have anything, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you.
Not that I'm aware of, Chair.
Okay, thank you. Moving on to public comment. Have we received public comments? I haven't noticed any. If we have, I don't think we've gotten any. All right, we'll move on to our work session. Item E, which is we're going to continue to talk about the ARPA funds, and this one is related to the nonprofit grants program. And thank you, Ken, for sending us the information and the update. And so we'll go ahead and begin with what the allocation allows for in this particular category. And thank you for doing that.
All right. And so Carolina, if you could promote Carrie to the panel too, that would be great. I think she's in the gallery. But just a quick refresher on this one. The nonprofit grant was one of them that the board identified as part of under the economic impact category. And so the board identified essentially a third of those funds for nonprofit grants, which is just over 2.2 million. So much like the previous discussions around the water and sewer, what we're coming back to the board to talk about is what this round of funding, what the board would like to see it look like. And thank you, Carrie, for pulling together the 3-page summary of what that provides an overview of the program and then gets into more of the nonprofit focus for this portion of the funds. And so at this point, there's some open questions related to, you'll see some suggested grant categories that has to do with general operating programs, capacity, capital, and some amounts set up for that. But there's still a question about where the board would like to see the funds prioritized. Another element that's not included in here that could be subject to consideration, because there's things about program and project grants, Whether or not the board is also open to, you want to look at economic impact or revenue impacts that maybe nonprofits have experienced during the pandemic is another option that you could consider or possibly include in this category as well. And so I'm just, again, if you look at the second page, and I apologize for sending this out late. We did upload it to the packet. So anybody who's watching and interested in looking at that, we did add it to the packet. And I sent it out via email, and in much in the same way, we're just looking for some guidance and wanting to make sure that we finalize or put together a program. This is kind of the starting conversation. I don't think we're ready to, to go live with a solicitation at this point. We wanted to have a discussion with the board, and then we could finalize the priorities depending on your feedback. And then we could come back to the board and finalize what that solicitation would look like, and then go live at that point.
Thank you. Thank you, Ken. Thank you, Carrie. Commissioners, I just wanted to, we've all received requests, and we've all got in our minds where we think this money will be best utilized. But I think now we have some structure as far as how would we go about how would we go about soliciting those grants. So any particular thoughts? I know initially I've always thought that the groups of the nonprofits that are actually doing the work and are successful in doing the work, I look at them as these are indicative of the work is getting done and the services are being provided. So want to look at those as the organizations that we really give sort of a leg up to being able to apply for these. But of course, everybody can apply for them. So thoughts, commissioners?
And Chair, I think that what you, I'm interpreting what you meant as like a group like a family place relief nursery who's already doing work and who has plans to do further work. That's what you had in mind. Is that what you meant?
Yeah, and I'm looking at, obviously the organizations that are in the process of completing projects. So and they're also, for instance, if you look at the mission, so the mission is doing a certain set of work with a certain demographic, and that's what we could perhaps be focusing on. But again, everybody can apply for the grants. But yes.
Chair, so thank you for that clarification. Yeah, the next question that kind of came to mind was just who's going to review these, and then what are their eligibility or what is the scoring criteria involved in it when we look at a potentially vast sea of them. And I'm assuming that's just, I'm looking at Carrie and I'm assuming that, and Ken, and I'm assuming that they're thinking that we will be reviewing and that we will be providing the scoring criteria in advance. So if you have thoughts on that, Chair and Commissioner Bershauer, I'm up for them.
Well, maybe Ken, did you have a thought on the scoring and on who would be doing maybe perhaps the initial review?
Well, I think honestly, it's kind of, we're at a place, I don't think we're prepared to really get into the specific scoring and who's going to assist with the review, because we haven't really hammered out the specific details on the eligibility criteria or the types of projects or programs that the board may want to prioritize. Because of course, that's going to be a driver for any scoring matrix that we put together, is how does it meet the priorities that are rolled out as part of this solicitation process. And I'm Carrie.
So much like we did with the water and sewer, this is a guideline based on not only the feedback that we received from nonprofits early in the process about the types of projects that they're looking to fund, but also with regard to what Treasury has provided as guidelines as well. So once the board decides what your priorities are, then I look to create an application that will get to that. And then from the application, then the scoring criteria and the selection committee.
Thank you for that. I have a question. I know we talked about this or I talked about this with the Housing Authority. Under eligibility, it talks about registered 501c3 nonprofit public charities. So is that, and it says may include, that is, that qualifier there basically allows for it to not be a 501c3. Is that correct? According to Treasury?
So it's up to us, I believe, in terms of nonprofits. We have designated, at least for this this initial guideline, 501c3s only, so not 501c6s. This would just be the public charities,
So,
unless otherwise directed.
okay, no, I was just going to say the word may. We didn't say should or shall, not shall, but must. So I want to make sure that there are other entities who might not fall under this particular designation, but that they could be eligible under this category.
So that's up to you. I think that that's an error in the language in the initial draft. I think it should say will be. That was the intention from this draft, unless.
Well, it does say that in the purpose on the first page. It says competitive grant program has been established to support 501c3 nonprofit organizations. But what the commissioner was saying, which is correct, that the Treasury guidance says may. So, you know, if the board would like to expand that to include more than just 501c3s, that if there's other nonprofit or even agencies that would be eligible for this, we could make that amendment as well.
Commissioners, is that something that you would have interest in? I want to make sure we're not excluding because of the details of a particular designation for a county agency.
Chair, I would like to expand it, and mostly because even if the something like the Housing Authority ultimately doesn't rise to the level in an application, I want to make sure that this is accessible to them.
Okay, thank you. I didn't want to kick them out of the running early on. So Commissioner Bershauer, thoughts on that?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I'm fine with expanding it. I had a couple, I think there's is there a typo on it where it should be 2.2 million? Is that, I've got to flip back here. Yeah, 2.265 million. My thought was that I think for this, what I would envision for this one is having commissioners have a little bit of, you know, if not sit on that decision-making board, have some input, because we've granted funds to different organizations in the past. Sometimes they're repetitive. And so I think that should kind of come into play. You know, if we've given somebody money through the budget process 3 years in a row, maybe it's, you know, we should put some emphasis on a new group, that kind of thing. I would probably give more weight to a frontline, someone who's delivering a frontline service, whether it's food assistance or housing or like remnant initiatives where you're transitioning people. You know, that kind of on the ground impact is probably what I would weight more. But I think it's important to note that, and I'm glad we have it in here, that there's some capital improvements or infrastructure costs. So if, you know, for instance, Hope on the Hill needs a new bus, right? A new used bus that might cost $20,000, but that's a critical piece of their program, and the rest of their program is funded by whatever they do. So I'm glad that we have that included in there. The other notes I had were, you know, focusing on projects or deliveries that would be complete, so that we're not funding pieces of something that ultimately doesn't get out the door. And then I know in the past, and I want to say it was maybe 2 years ago, in the budget meetings, we had several nonprofits come forward asking for assistance. One of them, I think, was a startup, or was trying to start a school or something like that, if memory serves. I would probably want to steer away from those types of nonprofits, even if they're established. Make sure that there's a bit of history that's included in what they do and where they're at, because I know we've had some issues like recently with, not Juliet's House, but Henderson House, and the status of their 501c3. That's a concern if you're giving out grants. And so I would want to see a little bit of kind of history of how, where are you at? Maybe not show us your financials, but just some history and current activity in the county, so that we know we're not giving to someone maybe just to, as more of a startup and just giving them some funds so they can do basic functions rather than having the money go towards, on the ground efforts, if that makes sense.
Thank you. Yeah, and I think that has a lot to do with what we've done in the past as far as our small business grants. We were not funding startups. We were funding organizations and businesses that were already up and running. Carrie?
So I'm hearing you say two different things. The first is that you would like established businesses, and we can make an eligibility criteria that an organization has been in operation for a minimum of 12 months or any duration that you like. But you're also talking about financial qualifications. So if you can talk a little bit more about the kinds of things that you would like to qualify, because we have to take that criteria and turn it into a question that we can then score. So if you, it's not very helpful to have 3 years of 990s, for instance, if you're not prepared to evaluate those in some manner. So, so what did you have in mind for criteria?
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't know if I want to go so far as to be evaluating their 990s. I just feel like, if you've been in existence for a year, then you have some funding that's keeping you going. You have some probably proven activity in the county as to what you've done. You probably have some established needs, and you've filed taxes, hopefully. So I feel like maybe that would be a more basic starting point for criteria, rather than starting to ask people for their financials. I don't know if
what we could do also is we could ask for full revenue and full expenses for the last 3 years. And then if there's a variance, that they explain that. And so then that gives us the ability to score based on that. If you're showing you've got a deficit, you're running on a deficit, that would be something that could potentially work against you. So we could do that.
Okay.
And use the word demonstrated projects, track record, program efficiency.
Yeah, I don't
have an actual question that says, you need to give at least one or maybe 1, 2, or 3 examples of successful programs in the past and what made them successful, that kind of thing.
Yeah, I think it's a great idea. I'm worried because I heard, Chair, you said before in a previous meeting that you wanted to make sure that if some of these nonprofits are really struggling just to get by month to month in terms of their operating costs, that we also consider that. So does this all sort of mesh with your feeling on that, or are we being a little bit too extreme in terms of the financial stuff?
Well, you brought up remnant initiatives, and I think that's a perfect example of the two thoughts. And one is that you have a program which has demonstrated effectiveness in the community. They have a vision, they have a mission, they have funding. Problem is they needed some gap funding to get them from July to January. And we weren't able to provide that because we didn't have it together at that point. So you're basically saying, should the program suffer because they weren't able to, their grant, so that let's say their grant funding was not renewed, or they didn't have one particular small grant, like for instance, YCAP didn't get funding for a street outreach program. And that doesn't mean that they weren't effective in doing it. It just means that because of the competitive grants, they didn't get that particular piece. They've got it now. So just in terms of being able to look at the overall effectiveness of the organization and not ding them for perhaps they missed a grant or they didn't get the grant, gives them the funding. Commissioner Kula?
Oh, I want to make sure that Commissioner Bershauer, were you?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, I just wanted to add to that one because my understanding is that Remnant Initiatives is actually a victim of the revenue loss at the county, and they're granting from county community justice. So I wonder whether in their particular thing, this might actually be where they could be considered as part of the revenue loss rather than through the economic impact.
Yeah, and absolutely, because again, we were talking about a relatively small amount of money. That was the request was for a small amount of money for that short 6-month period. And yes, I'm sure there are a number of different categories. Several of these organizations, like the Housing Authority, could fit under a number of those different categories. Carrie?
Oh, so I just
sorry.
meant no, I just meant that in the counties, because we have a revenue loss. I'm looking,
Yes.
sorry, I have to switch back and forth. They're really associated with revenue loss because the department didn't have enough money to fund them.
Right. No, I understand that. I was
I was just wondering, rather than putting it in here and wanting to make sure that our eligibility criteria included something for remnant, that we maybe actually consider them for a different category of funding altogether.
No, I was just using them as the example since it was brought up that in terms of if you were to look at them and say there's a shortfall there based on a grant or funding that didn't transpire, that we wouldn't necessarily say, okay, well then that precludes your eligibility because you don't have that funding. That doesn't mean anything in that particular case.
Yeah, I see what you mean, because it would be a catch-22. Sorry.
Sure. Right.
My suggestion on that would be that they would apply for the general operating expenses, right?
Right.
And so we would have, each of these different categories can have specific questions related to that category. So if you want to get at whether there were some revenue loss or there were some other hardships that were brought on by COVID, they could apply for general operating expenses, and it wouldn't be project-based.
Yeah, and I just wanted to add just really quickly, because when we were going into the revenue impacts, that's a little bit different because that's more internal impacts to the county revenue impacts. And where this category is for economic impacts on, outside experienced by the community. So I think if there was a revenue impact or like remnant initiatives as an example where that came up, which I don't know, I'd have to go back and circle back, but I don't know if that revenue impact was a legislative impact or was it really COVID impact, because I think it was more legislative around the probation fees. But I do think that I agree with Carrie that would be an application for the general operating type grants, for any operating impacts or loss of revenues that a nonprofit may have had because either a source of funds went away or a source of funds was impacted and they're not able to continue to operate. They could apply for a grant here and then help cover some of those operational costs moving forward.
And then the evaluation criteria also in a situation like that would be around, what is your financial sustainability moving forward? So you had this impact and you had this gap and you need this broad operating support. What have you done to make sure that you'll be able to continue in the future?
Yes, I think we're all agreeing on the basis of this. We're all just coming at it from different directions, but I think I'd rather have these questions now than to try to figure it out once we're trying to get applications scored.
Yeah, and I think that overall, Chair, this is a good start to a framework.
I think so as well. So number one, I just want to make sure that we can change the qualification for applications that you have to be within Yamhill County, delivering services within Yamhill County, and that it would include, it can include 501c3s.
Do you want 6s as well?
Yes.
And then another part that I would kind of draw the board's attention to is on, I think it's on the first page underneath the flow chart. There's kind of a focus, and there's a list of activities or program areas. I think another part to kind of keep in mind too, because when we're considering developing a scoring or a criteria, is, you see the list here. One, are we missing anything on the list that you would like to have added? And then the second part with this list of items, is there anything that has a higher priority or has kind of a ranking that we should apply more of a weight or a priority in scoring to? Is it, investing in housing and neighborhoods versus educational? I'm letting the siren go by. Okay. So that would be another area that I don't think we necessarily have to go through the exercise today to think about, but I think that's going to be another area, because I'm not sure, based on the amount of funds that we have available, and we already saw a list when commissioners were reaching out to nonprofits and we were getting project requests, we were getting a pretty large number of requests that came forward, and the dollar amounts are everything from $4,500 to over $1 million. And so if the board really wants to further refine what the scoring and prioritization looks like, that would be another area to look at, on which types of service delivery you would want to, put at the top of the list and down.
Commissioner Bershauer, thank you, Ken.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Ken. The only thing that jumps out to me is the let me pull it up here, where it says things like health disparities and behavioral healthcare needs. I feel like we have another bucket of money that I think has more money in it for public health. And so, and then considering on top of that, some of the assistance from the state that we have approved, I kind of feel like maybe some of the focus in here for healthcare needs to be shifted over to the other bucket of money. And at least from my perspective, I would rather focus on kind of what I said before, is the critical needs, housing, shelter, food assistance, that kind of stuff. It seems a little bit more appropriate, or at least higher priority for this bucket of money, rather than some of like the behavioral healthcare stuff, at least from my perspective.
So these are going to be just the nonprofits that assist with that, the Provoking Hopes, the Encompass Yamhill Valley, the Gospel Rescue Mission, and the money that has already been allocated for the the health section is not transferable to these types of programs. Is that correct? It wasn't identified as being transferable.
Right.
Okay, maybe I'm just misunderstanding what they mean, but addressing health disparities, we kind of we had a huge discussion about that in terms of the state funds that were coming in and where those dollars should be focused. So I'm just talking out loud, but I would rather if Provoking Hope and the work that they do connects somebody to behavioral health care, that's fantastic. I would still place high priority on Provoking Hope. I'm just kind of going through the stated focus that we have listed here, and kind of to Ken's question or comment.
I to sort of piggyback on that, I'm looking at the addressing health disparities and social determinants of health. So for instance, we see that the YCCO, that Yamhill Community Care, has devoted an awful lot of funding from their percentage of share that they're required regarding determinants of health and health disparities and things like that. So you're getting huge influx of money coming from the CCO. And then you also have the one here I'm questioning or wondering about how we would translate this into an actual grant, the addressing of educational disparities. Give me a for instance.
So that could be the Ed Foundation. That could be anybody that has an educational piece that focuses on income-related disparities, poverty, those kinds of things.
And then presumably that could also include, Chair, the CTEC West or the West
Absolutely.
Valley Career and Technical Education Center as well. I'm assuming that that would be an example of that. And I would say that on my side of things, since the three of us, Commissioner and Chair, seem to be more wanting to focus on kind of lasting generational level of change with the investments that we have, recognizing that this pot of money isn't enough to do that. It seems like a focus on, or high scoring, at least on the capital side of things, on a high score to me and a high level of like priority would be given to capital improvements that are part of an overall project that transform the lives of people for generations, whether that be the building of housing or the building. I'm trying to pull back my memories of the YCAP proposal. I think included one of their proposals included building extra cold storage facilities. These like improvements that are tangible that they can do right away, and that are going to allow them to serve the community for a long time. And to that end, so then the other component of that would be that I would imagine it would be appropriate to include a match requirement for the capital, not for operating, for this kind of, this nonprofit needs to get through the year because funding went dry. Like, I think it's a different pot of money, but I do think that we should have some kind of match required.
For capital only, you're talking about. For capital.
That's my thought, Chair. Yeah, and that can be something like their staff time.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Berschauer.
Chair, I don't disagree with the match on the capital stuff. So, but let's say, Turtle Dove Shelters comes forward and submits a request because they need funding for 50 mobile shelters. Is that kind of falling along the lines of something that you would expect them to match, or are we talking about major sort of capital investments?
So the example of Turtle Dove, those would be a program or a project, and those are just materials and supplies. That would not constitute a capital expenditure or a capital purchase.
Oh, right, because that's really they're building these shelters. That's their project.
Not building a headquarters.
Okay, so I'm just using this as an example, but they have a lack of space of where to park them. Their clients do, right? So if they wanted to go buy a piece of property in the city of McMinnville, that would be considered a capital investment where they would have to come in with matching funds.
Not to make this more confusing, but that would actually be an acquisition. So, and we don't have that in here at all. I mean, we could call that, but typically that would be called an acquisition, any kind of land or existing building.
I'm glad you're confusing or complicating it, because that's good. That's a good language.
Do we have to call that out separately out from the capital category? Or could it also be considered a capital?
You could leave it in there. We would just need to make sure that we are clear on that distinction, because I'll get dozens of calls. And so these are the clarifications that if we can put that into the guidelines, here's an example of capital purchases, land, building, whatever, then that helps people to navigate which category they want to apply.
I mean, basically, we have a definition that we utilize for what a capital project is, which is essentially anything that costs more than $5,000 and has more of a year of lifespan. And it can be a fixed asset, it can be a building, it can be a property, it can, and there's a set definition, at least that we adhere to under our budget rules on what's a capital expenditure. So we could get into defining what a capital grant looks like, because I think even if they're applying for a portion of funding for a new acquisition, like they're purchasing a building, or if they're doing something and this, I think an acquisition could fall under a capital program. We would just need to possibly define that maybe a little bit more in the application and make sure we have a definition that's there that it includes these types of projects.
Commissioner Kula, you said you were talking about the match. I guess I'm a little concerned because some of our nonprofits are so small that, are you concerned about their ability to match? I don't know. I feel like maybe we should do like an up to, where it's sort of decided case by case. I don't know. I just am a little worried about that.
Yeah, so my thought on that, Commissioner, is that if an organization is relying exclusively upon us for their project, that's not an organization that's going to, in my view, long-term be a successful and stable organization. I want to see them having different ways that they're accessing their resources, whether that's just a volunteer architect, right? And that they bring those funds in, that staff funding, or whether it's they've received an OCF, an Oregon Community Foundation grant, and then this is the next step in the work that they're doing, or whether they have a long-term contract with the state. I just think that for capital projects specifically, they need to have something that's not just us.
The thing that you bring up that I think is important also is that, so the two different things, match requirements, you can set whatever ratio you want, whether that is 25%, 100% of the ask or the budget, that is cash and in kind. So any donated materials, time, services, those kinds of things count towards that match as well. But the other issue is that what part of the evaluation criteria is the project budget. And, as a general guideline, no funder wants to provide more than, say, 50% of any project's budget. So that's a criteria also. We would have them include their project budget and the alternate sources of revenue, whether those are secured or those are pending or those are things that they're going to go after. So that is a broader criteria as well.
Okay, thank you.
And the other thing along those lines, and just to use the Housing Authority as an example, because they're the first ones that come to mind. So they're working on a project, a multi-million dollar, hundreds of millions of dollars for the Stratus project, for instance. They will stand a better chance of securing state funding if they show that there's local buy-in. So we don't want to preclude them by saying, okay, this is sort of part of a match, but it's not, it's really just showing buy-in. So would we consider that under program and project grants?
So say that again. They can use it towards other grants that they receive, but what is your concern on that?
Well, no, the question is that, again, when you show that local buy-in, it gives you a little more leverage when you're looking for the bigger grants at the state level, for instance. So if we say that regarding program and project grants, say up to $250,000, that would come under the category of a program or a project. So they wouldn't have to necessarily say, we'd really like to be able to say we've pigeonholed this money. It's for the project, but we can show the local buy-in.
Yeah, I think that in those large projects, there are so many sub projects that I encourage people to break those out and to look at, are you asking for a piece of the whole, or are you segmenting out a phase of a larger project that is a much more manageable chunk, and that's how you would be evaluating your match?
Because one thing I'd like to add is something that once, because I think a lot of the questions and discussions will probably come clear once we actually start seeing and reviewing applications. But one thing that I would just kind of put out there, that to keep in mind when we're evaluating, and I'm not sure if this is going to happen as part of the application or it'll be deliberations when selecting the projects. I think some of the risk or exposure we have with these funds is because there are some specific dates on when these funds have to be spent and used. And so if you're seeing a proposal that they're applying for other funding sources, and this project's going to be contingent, that they're going to take, you know, I'm just going to use round numbers, that they've been awarded $500,000 of a $2 million project, but they're also pursuing funding sources with other grants or other things that haven't been secured yet. And then if those don't get awarded, that could, you know, have us scrambling at some point if whether or not the project's feasible, or if there's a, you know, so that's just something else that I think to kind of keep in mind, because we do have some, what I don't want to do is we start running up against the ARPA deadline 3 years from now and we still have $2 million to spend because some of the projects weren't able to, you know, didn't come to fruition, or they didn't get the additional funding needed to kind of get it over the hump. So.
And in that
And-
case
and
too,
that's-
when I talk to people, I would encourage them in that situation to create a smaller subset of the larger budget.
Jinx. That's exactly what I was going to say. Thank you.
Right. So for instance, if you have a very large project, what you could do, because now is this something that is required in terms of the completion within 18 months? 18 months of what? Disbursement of the funds, or?
18 months of signature of the contract agreement with Yamhill County.
So if you have a really large project that's going to be going for state or federal funds, you would just say you can make this, you know, phase one planning, put it towards
exactly.
phase one planning or
Yeah.
something like that. And okay, all right, that makes sense. Now,
And
as
then if
far,
it's, oh, I was just thinking, you know, if we're thinking like a big building project versus YCAP and a remote or a satellite campus, you know, YCAP is like, I can build this in 18 months. Here's my match. Here's the plans for it. It's all ready to go, versus a big project where it might just be the planning or engineering or whatever. And then that's the match that they need to show local buy-in.
right, and then the other thing is who will be sitting on that initial, for the initial review of those. Obviously, the commissioners will be weighing in, but ultimately, who's going to be looking at these who isn't already perhaps asking for one of these grants? I can't think of anybody.
I was going to say Carrie, but I don't know.
Well,
Yeah, I
Carrie
think
and
that
Ken.
we
Yeah.
usually wait until the end, till after we have the application set and the criteria, and then we can look at who might be a good candidate for the selection committee. Certainly the commissioners could do it. The three of you could do it. We've used some of our economic development partners in the past for some of those. So we would just have to give some thought to who would be good candidates that don't already have an application in the running.
And I think to Commissioner Bershauer's point about just looking back retrospectively at some of the grants that we've given out, some of the organizations, and some of them have been several years in a row. So if we take that into consideration, that we're going to be factoring in what has the county given funding to in the past, and just looking at project timeline, those types of things. Ken, were you?
Oh.
I think Ken were you saying something? No?
You have two options with that piece. You can either create an eligibility criteria that says you may not have received money from one of the county grants in X number of months or X number of years, or you can require that they disclose any grants that they've received from the county, and then we'll build that into the scoring criteria that does count against you.
Well, I don't know that it would necessarily count against them, because some of these organizations have really put that money to good use. I don't want to make it a sort of you're punished because you wound up having the confidence of the budget committee or the commissioners in the past. I'd like to have it called out just so that we can look at that, but I don't think it necessarily means it's a negative.
yeah, and I was just, the only thought that I have is, I think, and the questions that Carrie's asking about building in the application, because in fairness to a nonprofit, before they go through the exercise of preparing an application, submitting it, we want to disclose that if there's going to be, well, you've received funding in the last 12 months, so you're not going to be funded. I think it's better to let nonprofits know or let organizations know, at the application period that thanks, before they already exhaust whatever limited time they have to respond to this application. I think if there's criteria that we want to build into this, I think it's better to do it early in the process, so then applicants are fully aware that their project might not get funded that they're thinking of proposing.
I don't want anyone to be just sort of not to be considered because they got money for, I just don't think
Okay.
that's fair. Commissioner Kula, you were going to say something?
Yeah, and because I think it's a good point that we have provided money to organizations in the past. You have provided it before me, and what I wonder if there's a kind of a way to do this is to get to the some of the thoughts here, where we want organizations that have been in operation so that we know that they're going to complete it. But then there was the comments about like, well, maybe we don't want organizations that we've given money to, and that really limits our pool. And what I wonder instead, since we know that some of these organizations are effective, is to have something in the middle, which is, if you have received money from us in the last 24 months, tell us what it was and how you used it, and like what it was, how you used it, and how it made the community better, because that can actually be an incentive for us to give them money, right?
Agreed, exactly. And some of them have pretty good track records of using the money, as we've seen. Commissioner Bershauer?
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I agree. I didn't mean to bring that up as a disqualifier. I thought that it would be good to know as part of the discussion, because maybe there is a pattern of us giving, particular organizations money and so-and-so has asked 3 or 4 times and hasn't received. So I just think it's a good piece of information to have. So I would agree with that. Maybe going back 24 months and saying, hey, if you've gotten something, please provide us some details.
And some of these organizations have received money a long time ago and just now are finishing up projects that required a whole lot more than we gave them. So we could even just say, I'd like to say longer than 24 months. So maybe in the last 5 years, because we go back a number of different budget years where we were giving out money for long-term projects. Ken, you think that makes sense?
Yeah, it makes perfect sense. And I was just going to add, because I think, because sometimes it seems like it just started yesterday, but we've actually not done any grant programs in the last 2 budget adoption cycles, specific to those types of projects. So I want to say it was 3 years ago, maybe the last time that we adopted a budget and awarded grant funds.
Stop it. That was a long time ago.
It's all melded together.
I was talking about discretionary. Maybe it was discretionary I was thinking of, but is that the same thing?
We've done the economic development funds too.
And we have, so
one question, Chair, when we're talking about which organizations are eligible, it was occurring to me as we were talking that the proposed change, would taxing districts be eligible?
I don't know. That doesn't ring true for me, only because there is a regular source of funding and it's a tax base. So I would be inclined to say, what are the organizations that don't have that guaranteed funding? But that's just me.
And that makes total sense. The reason why I asked that is I think about our smaller cities and the more rural areas of Yamhill County, who larger organizations are either have satellites in them, or they go to them, or they require you to come to them. And school districts and fire districts are organizations that might say like, hey, I want to start a program here for this. I have a track record of putting things into motion. What do you think? So it just occurred to me that if we limit it, like I I think I was part of the approval process for the grant to the city of Willamina for their code update, right? And I thought that whoever scored it and scored it highly was thinking really creatively about how to improve the economic vitality of a small town by their code improvements. And I just wonder whether there's cities, school districts, and fire districts that might be thinking, hey, it would be really nice to do this program in our community. Here's the opportunity to do that. But if we foreclose it, then they can't. Carrie?
We have talked about opening the next round of the economic development grants, the traditional ones, the strategic investment, the small grants, and the startup grants in the spring. So that's kind of what we're thinking, that after we get through these rounds.
In the past, we've given funding to, for instance, if you look at the various cities that have come to us and they have gone through the economic development grants. And I think that's a better fit for it. I think we certainly have enough need in this with this pot of money. And we've gotten a lot of requests and we don't have a lot of money. I would like to be able to consider those cities that come to us, whether it's for something going on in their parks or whether it's improvement to a restroom in their parks or signage or something, that we look at it in that way, but not to have them eligible because they are a taxing district.
No, and that's a good clarification, because I think we, originally, I'm circling back to when we started the discussion about the eligibility. I think I was going down the path about whether or not a small jurisdiction or something, if they had a program within that city, possibly being eligible for this. But it sounds like, no, we really want to keep it to the nonprofits. So that makes sense. It's a good clarification.
Another question for you all to consider is, are you willing to accept multiple applications under multiple categories from the same entities?
Chair, I would say yes, because our discussions are sort of meshing together with some of these programs. So I think naturally we're going to have some crossover there.
I agree. Commissioner Kula?
You all beat me to the unmute button. So yeah, I think that especially how some of these are going to be, some projects that people are working on have a lot of components.
Okay.
For me, it's risk management, if I could apply for multiple.
Sure. And one might be, sorry, there are bugs because these are Todd's plants. He left me a gift. There's bugs, if you can see me going like this. But yeah, I would like to see people hit it from different directions, because what they do is not just focused on one facet. So the next step would be for us to put this into an RFP, and then have people just basically submit applications for the grants under this category.
So it would be similar to the water and sewer, where I will write out the whole application for each of the category, and then also what the scoring criteria will be in that packet that you approved on the last round. It'll look the same, and it will actually be built through the online portal. So they will submit everything online. The selection criteria will all be done.
Okay, sounds good. Ken? Anything to add as to what we haven't addressed?
Let's see.
Really, the only other thing is timeline.
Yeah, the timeline, I think, is going to be the other one. I think it's an ambitious timeline that we're looking at on how quickly we can get this finalized and opened up. So we're going to have to revise the timeline, a little bit, because I think we were looking at doing award notifications by the end of this calendar year and then start dispersing funds in January.
Mm-hmm. What's a realistic timeline as far as closing the applications and then also making the determination and awarding the grants? Are we adding another month?
I think we can open mid-December, keep it open for 30 days, close mid-January, select Selection committee meets for a couple weeks and goes over it, and then you have time for the recommendations to the board. So disbursement would be February. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, you kind of froze up there a little bit.
Oh, yeah. So applications open December, close in January. Selection committee and then the board review the recommendations and announcements in February and disbursement in February.
Because I think the 18-month requirement on the project completion, that is something that we established. And so that I don't believe that 18 months from January is tied to Treasury guidelines. We have a little more flexibility. But again, we want to put some closure to this because of all the various reporting requirements that I'm going to have to, when it comes time to closing out these grants and the reports that I need to make. We want to make sure we have sufficient time. And then, like I was saying before, that if for some reason something were to change, we also want to make sure we have sufficient time that if for some reason we have a pool of funds that were not actually spent on the project, or the project didn't come to fruition, that we could then have plenty of time to divert those funds to other needed areas. So the timelines are really for us internally to make sure that we can get all of our reporting done. And then we also have time to redivert the funds if need be and still stay within the Treasury established deadlines for spending these funds.
Okay, so this timeline as revised, would that give you a comfortable window of time to get these different pieces addressed? And the other thing along the lines of, have we given any further consideration to perhaps contracting out pieces of doing some of this so it's not falling in staff's lap to be able to try to get these things done?
I think I feel confident that, with doing the water and sewer and doing this proposal is well within our wheelhouse and ability to get it done. And with us already in communications about the childcare portion, with that going to an outside entity, the conversations around having the impacted industries go to have that managed by an outside, I think it's manageable at this point. I think if
Okay.
we can do this. I mean, because this one, we've done these types of grants before. And so not necessarily on this size and scope, but I feel real confident with our current staffing that we can manage these two programs.
Okay. Anything else, commissioners? Well, if
Thank
there's
you.
not, thank you. If there's nothing else, thank you, Carrie. Thank you, Ken. I appreciate the work on this. This is nice to be able to at least start to see some movement. Okay, thank you.
All right.
We'll move on to our next item, which is department updates, and we have none. Our consent agenda. Do we have a motion to approve?
Chair, I move that we let me allow Commissioner Berschauer.
Thank you, Commissioner. That's very kind of you.
So moved, Chair.
We have a motion to approve the consent agenda. Further discussion. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Motion passes. On to old business, under other business. I, consideration of approval of Yamhill County to enter into participating agency addendum with U.S. Bank for procurement card services. And this has to do with the credit card account for the county. Did everybody have a chance to look at that? Ken, did you want to add anything to that?
I don't think I have anything more to add than what Mike put in the memo. Again,
Okay.
This is, we're part of a participating agency. We've done this in the past, and so that's been updated.
Okay, motion to approve item I1.
I move that we approve item I1.
Okay, motion to approve. Further discussion. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
Motion passes. On to item I2, consideration of approval to authorize Health and Human Services Director or designate on the behalf of Yamhill County Health and Human Services to submit an application for funding from the Oregon Health Authority in the approximate amount of $24,000. And I think you've all had a chance to see, we do have some retention issues, and we want to make it a little bit more welcoming for people who are dealing with residential care types of behavioral health positions to retain employment. So I will make a motion to approve item I2. Further discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Motion passes. On to item I3, consideration of approval to authorize Health and Human Services Director designee on behalf of the Yamhill County Health and Human Services to submit an application for funding from the Oregon Department of Veterans Affairs to the approximate amount of $40,000. And this has to do with barriers to transportation and housing. So do we have a motion to approve?
So moved.
Okay, we have a motion to approve. Further discussion. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
Motion passes. On to item I4, consideration of approval of grant agreement 107-2021-5006-11 between Yamhill County Transit and the Department of Administrative Services to offset expiring tax credits in the amount of $718,079 effective upon approval through June 30, 2023. Well, this is, Christian, I know this has been quite a long backstory on the whole tax credits. And now we have the opportunity to make use of those. So did you want to, Ken?
And I was just going to add that Cynthia is in the attendance. So if you have questions or if you would like to hear from Cynthia, we can have her promoted and she can answer any questions you have as well.
Yes, thank you. And Kristen, did you want to weigh in on the backstory on this? It's fairly well documented, going back to the legislation, going back to the whole history of this and how the county's been impacted and all of that.
No, I think I'll let Cynthia do that. I was actually going to ask that you approve this subject to the final review and approval of County Council, because I'm working with DAS. We needed to make just a couple of changes, and we're working on those changes today. I don't expect it to be anything that takes much longer, but we just didn't get it wrapped up today. But yeah, I can share some of the history of Cynthia. Can't, but I'm sure she'll have the latest and greatest update on just exactly how this came about, which I agree is a fantastic resolution.
Okay, thank
I
you.
will say that I even have a little bit of the idea of how this came about.
Yeah, it goes back a number of years, that's for sure. Cynthia, thank you for being with us. Do you want to just give us the quick summation of how we came to this situation and the legislative fix that wound up coming to our rescue?
Sure, be happy to. Good afternoon, everybody. Yeah, I was very pleased when I learned about this opportunity, but way back in 2016, when I first started, the county had two projects that were sort of almost, they hadn't been submitted yet. So I spent quite a bit of time back my first year here and submitted the projects, and those projects cost quite a bit of money. I put in my memo 30,000, but I actually looked it up. It was actually $23,479 in fees. And then shortly after we finished it, we're very proud of ourselves that we got everything submitted. Then the rules changed, and it essentially made it so that it just didn't work. We couldn't sell the credits, and we had over $1 million that we should have gotten. It would have been almost 1.176 million. And then we tried to meet with the Department of Energy. We went through quite a process to try to figure out how to resolve this. And then the Association of Oregon Counties, they got involved and they wrote some letters. They spent some time at the legislature the year after that. And then we didn't really hear anything for a while. And then there were 4 transit districts that were affected. And we really should probably thank Chariots, because they were probably the entity that had the greatest loss due to these rule changes. So they actually hired a firm called CRM. I forget what it stands for, but anyway, they then began working on this for quite a few years. And then finally, long story short, they introduced House Bill 3056 to find a resolution and to figure out a way to buy out the unused credits. There were 4 transit districts that were affected. Yamhill County was actually used as one of the little examples in all of the stories that were told to the various legislators, et cetera. And then they were able to get it done. And so they got House Bill 5006, which found a resolution and got some funding. And that funding is coming through the Department of DAS, Department of Administrative Services. So it is an unusual grant. We haven't, it's a different style of a grant than we typically see, but they're going to allocate $718,079 to help offset the loss of those funds. And so that's pretty exciting. I think I sent you all copies of a lot of the background information. I didn't bore you with all of the original applications because those are huge documents, but if anybody's interested, you're welcome to contact me and I'll be happy to share more information if you would like. The only thing that I would mention as far as the project, they did indicate that how we spend this funding, they would like it to be spent on either COVID-related expenses or alternative fuel, green projects. So the description, if you saw the application, is fairly general. I pretty much put just a $50,000 that could go towards COVID-related expenses, and then the rest, it could be for infrastructure. It's fairly general. It just says, alternative fuel vehicle and infrastructure. So we are working on a fleet transition plan to try to look at what are our options when it comes to, transitioning our fleet to a more green fleet. And so I think we'll have some flexibility. Probably my only concern about this is that the end date of the grant is June of 2023. So I think we'll be able to get it done, but let's say that we were buying a bus with that could be a challenge. So that's about the only issue that I see with it. Otherwise, I think it's great news, and I think it's very rare that this ever happens. So I think Yamhill County is lucky to be able to capture these funds.
Cynthia, thank you for that. I have a question. So when it talks about the board action that's requested, talks about supporting a transition plan for the fleet to transition to low or no emission vehicles. Do we have we established what the county's ultimate goal is with that, number one? And could we use those funds to apply them to a transit center instead?
I don't expect you to decide here with the money exactly what that money is going to be spent on. It's going to be spent on, we're going to come up with a plan for the alternative fuels, but it could, if you look at the application itself, which was fairly simple, it can be spent on infrastructure and it can be spent on vehicles. So I think we could apply that to the transit center. We could apply that to, if we're going to be doing a site analysis for a new facility. So obviously, whatever we come up with, we're going to have look into infrastructure for whatever alternative fuels we decide to use. So I interpreted that we could even spend some of this money to actually create the plan. So I totally expect I would come back to you guys with, okay, here's what we plan to do. Here's how we plan to spend that funding. So you'll have more opportunities to weigh in on where exactly those dollars are spent and how they're spent.
But as far as, yes, thank you. As far as a timeline in terms of expending the funds, what is that looking like? Did you say?
The grant agreement says June of 2023.
So what does that mean ultimately in terms of what our commitment is to expending those funds? Can they be sort of, again, aspirational, and we would like to pay for a plan, or we'd like to pay for a project analysis of a location or something?
It's my understanding we can spend it on that, as anything that would support us getting to the end point of having alternative fuel vehicles. As far as I interpret, I think we could spend it on a plan, we could spend it on analysis, we could spend it on actual vehicles. Like maybe decide, like Ken and I were talking, maybe we decide to get, smaller vehicles or vans or something, and those might be easier and shorter time frame if you were going to try and do some, electric vehicles. So yeah, my understanding is we have flexibility, and it has flexibility in what we can do with those funds.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Commissioner Kula?
Yes, thank you. And thank you, Cynthia, for all of your work on this. I will note that this is also a little bit more of the backstory to how Yamhill County Transit ended up being part of it is that Chariots didn't see the bill moving forward. And at Council of Governments Legislative Committee, the council president of Chariot said, hey, are there any other jurisdictions that have tax credits they never got to cash in, who want to join us in supporting this bill and really getting it out of, it was just sitting there in committee. And Cynthia was like, yep, we have tax credits and we'd love to cash them in. And it ended up being that they, my understanding is that American Rescue Plan dollars at the state went into cash out. So that's where the funding came from for it. But it was really about like, oh, it's more than just Chariots who wants their money back, essentially. So I thought it was a good example of cooperation.
Thank you. Appreciate that. Any other questions? I just want to make sure that what we agree to today doesn't put us in a position where we haven't, you know, we have some, I guess, guardrails on what it is we're going to be doing with it. So we have a general idea. It looks like we have a lot of latitude.
We do. And I'm happy to come back to you once we just have a little bit of more prep work to do. And then I can come back to you with an actual plan. So you can say, okay, here's how we plan to spend it.
Okay.
And I plan to do that. I wouldn't just go off and
Spend it.
Yep.
Thank you. Commissioner Bershauer.
Thank you, Chair. Kind of to clarifying your question, Commissioner Stara, and then Cynthia. So are we working from a plan that we already have, or do we not have a plan for the future, or are we revising a plan?
We actually, of course we have our transit plan, but it's fairly general in the transit plan about larger capital projects. So I don't know, you probably recall back, we were having a discussion a few months ago when there was going to be a earmark opportunity for some possibly electric buses. And we decided not to submit for that because we weren't quite ready. So I decided to put into the STIF plan that we would create a plan, a transition plan for our fleet, and really look at, okay, what are our opportunities when it comes to transitioning to alternative fuels. So I have that on my list of things to do this fiscal year, to try to get the plan completed. And so what I'm thinking is I'll finish that plan, and then that will identify what our needs are as far as infrastructure, as well as vehicles, the types of vehicles we want to purchase, et cetera. So I'm hoping we can finish that plan, that fleet transition plan, by the end of this fiscal year, by June of 2022. So then we would have a year at least to do, spend the rest of the funding. And I could also talk, I suppose, with DAS if it was, I don't know I haven't worked with DAS with a grant agreement to know how they operate when it comes to extensions and things like that, should we need to do that down the road.
Okay, thank you, Cynthia.
Thank you. Anything else? We can go ahead and Commissioner Kula, do you want to make a motion?
Absolutely. I would need to pull up, what item is it?
I can read it to you. It's item I5, 4.
Okay, great.
4.
And don't forget the Christian caveat.
That's right. I move that we approve item I4 subject to final approval of County Council.
Okay, we have a motion to approve item I4. Any further discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Motion passes. Cynthia, thank you as always.
Thank you.
Doing a really good job for us. Thank you. We appreciate you. Okay, on to item I5, consideration to authorize the county administrator to accept and record a right-of-way deed for real property located at County Road North 430 Peavine Road, tax lot 4528-5500. And Ken, did you want to add anything to this, or is this just basically accepting and recording the right-of-way deed?
My name's included for signing the document, but I think County Council's office and our county surveyor are the ones who prepared this submittal. So,
and we have county surveyor in the attendees as well, if you have questions for him.
Oh, okay. Let me see. Hold on. Let me pull up my.
I wasn't sure if Jason was prepared to join, or Christian.
Yes, there he is. Jason. I see him there now. I figured this out.
So I think Carolina, well, he's moving. All right.
Okay, great. So Christian, did you want to give us the basis for this, or should we go to Jason for that?
Yeah, I mean, I think Jason can probably provide backstory. It's not terribly complicated.
Can you hear me?
Hi, Jason. We can hear you. We can't see you,
Okay.
but we'll take it.
Not sure what the camera is doing here, but thank you for having me here. This issue is an issue to clean up an existing road alignment. The owners have been working through this process of a partition plat, and they are graciously helping us realign the legal right-of-way with the physical right-of-way of Peavine Road through their property. The reason that we've requested the county administrator to sign is we were unsure of the phasing with the whatever transactions the private owners are doing amongst themselves with the property. So we thought it to be a little more convenient for the overall operation to just have the county administrator sign the deed at a convenient time for the parties.
Thank you. Commissioners, any questions for Jason?
No, Chair, and thank you, Jason.
Jason, it's nice to see you, see you here. It's nice to have you join us. We've not had much opportunity to see you, but this is our county surveyor, Jason. Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Thank you, commissioners.
Thank you. Do we have a motion to approve item I-5?
I move that we approve item I-5.
Motion to approve. Further discussion. Hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Motion passes. On to item I-6, consideration of approval of the modification to the agreement between Yamhill County and Summit Strategies Government Affairs LLC for consulting services in the amount of $140,000 retroactive to July 1st, 2021 through June 30, 2022. And we get these on a regular basis coming to us on behalf of the bypass. Commissioner Kula, did you want to weigh in on this at all?
No, Chair. We're just the ones who we collate we assemble everybody's contributions from jurisdictions, organizations, and the tribe.
Okay, thank you. Motion to approve?
Oh, I'm sorry. Yes. So I move that we approve item I-6, and under further discussion, I will say that this is a lower total bill for the lobbying services because we're not in the long session, so there simply doesn't as much time.
It doesn't seem quite as exorbitant as we're usually approving. I thought, whoa, that's kind of a small ticket item this time. So we have a motion to approve item I-6. Further discussion. Hearing none. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Motion passes. On to item I-7, consideration of approval of resolution 21-11-09-1 proclaiming November as National Runaway Prevention Month in Yamhill County. We've done this on a number of occasions, but I did want to, before we go ahead and discuss this, I wanted to mention a few things about youth outreach in McMinnville under the umbrella of YCAP. And that is that they have long had a street outreach program, even when there was no consideration of a drop-in center in McMinnville, where they had their staff going around mostly on 3rd and going over by the library and really just trying to interface with kids who had no other catch point. And they would oftentimes talk about how reluctant these kids were to even trust anybody, and it took a long time, but then ultimately that they do, and see some of the really good things that come out of it. So just to give you some numbers as far as the number of kids served over the last year, 243 have been served at the drop-in center, and there have been over 2,500 visits. And this is since October of last year. You have 38 kids who've had mental health services, 57 children, youth who've come in for academic support. And I've seen some of those mentors working with the kids at the computers and helping them with their homework. And some of these kids there's no other place for them to go to get this academic support. So I really do appreciate the fact that now that they're looking at what's going to happen with the Youth Outreach Center in McMinnville, What we do know is that the number one priority is establishing of a lease with HHS, and they're working on that, getting access to the building. And then hopefully we can have that done by the end of the year. And then also the next thing is looking at some of the renovations that have to happen in the space. So right now it looks like they have sufficient funding to cover that, but we know that the Runaway youth, oftentimes the only place they know to go hang out is the drop-in center, and that is where a lot of lives are changed. And I've seen that happen firsthand, so I'm kind of partial to it. So I just want to say that I appreciate the fact that Youth Outreach and HHS are going to be working to get that to happen in McMinnville. So now we have a resolution, and I'm trying to find it. But in any event, we have a resolution which is basically National Runaway Prevention Month, and I will go ahead and we'll read that, and then we'll have a motion to approve it. So this is in the matter of a resolution proclaiming November as National Runaway Prevention Month in Yamhill County, whereas the future well-being of our nation is dependent upon the value we place on young people. We must provide opportunities for youth to acquire the knowledge, skills, and abilities to develop into healthy, productive adults by enlisting families and other adults to serve as mentors and role models, guiding them towards wise choices and available resources. And whereas young people with the least access to these resources and support are those that are runaway and in homeless situations. In our country, an estimated 4.2 million youth and young adults experience homelessness each year. Across Yamhill County, over 621 runaway and homeless youth have been identified each year. And whereas by working to bring awareness, resources, and communication, we can prevent the situations that compel youth to run away. And whereas the first step in prevention is gaining an understanding of the facts and then empowering families and communities to aid our nation's youth in protecting themselves and assuring them of resources and support necessary for their success. Finally, we must challenge adults to act as mentors and role models, guiding them toward available resources and wise choices. And whereas we support the efforts of the community-based, faith-based, and public organizations in Yamhill County who are working diligently to increase public awareness, advocate on behalf of, and provide positive and safe alternatives to runaway and homeless youth and their families. Now, therefore, let it be resolved, the Yamhill County Board of Commissioners does hereby proclaim November as National Runaway Prevention Month in Yamhill County, Oregon, and in doing so encourages all citizens of Yamhill County to join in supporting young people who have run away, who are at high risk of doing so by personal relationships, teaching skills that promote positive life choices, and provide a safety net of trusted individuals and resources, and being available as they transition into adulthood. Done this, let's see, it's not the first day, so that would be the 9th day of November 2021. So do we have a motion to approve?
I move that we approve, Chair.
Motion to approve. Further discussion. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Motion passes. Okay. All righty. Well, are there any other, we don't have public hearings, and any announcements?
Chair, I just want to note that I'm going to be speaking to the Home Builders Alliance Government Affairs Committee Thursday, actually during our time on Veterans Day. I'm talking to them about the state of housing in the different cities and then the county, and then talking about legislative fixes that they have in mind and we've talked about here in the county. So just a heads up, I'll be talking with them about that.
Thank you, Commissioner. Anybody else? Okay. If there's nothing else for the good of the order, we'll go